May 13, 1943, Tunis, Tunisia. Weary German physicians stepped off transport ships expecting punishment, chains, and starvation. Instead, they entered spotless hospitals, white sheets, stocked cabinets, and antibiotics they hadn't seen in years. Men trained for war suddenly found themselves treated not as captives, but as professionals. The clang of metal gangways, the scent of fresh bread and soap, and the stunned silence on their faces told the story. How could the enemy offer them more dignity than their own nation ever had? This is the hidden chapter of the German POW doctors in America, what they witnessed, what they learned, and how it reshaped everything. That date, May 13, 1943, burned itself into the memory of every German soldier who surrendered in Tunisia. Nearly 275,000 Axis troops, Wehrmacht and Afrika Korps alike, laid down their weapons beneath the scorching North African sun. Among them were hundreds of medical officers, surgeons, dentists, pharmacists, and nurses who had served on dust-filled battlefields, splinting bones with scraps of wood and reusing bandages until they disintegrated. Their defeat should have meant disgrace. Yet, as one physician later wrote, "The Americans treated us not as criminals, but as peers who had been fairly beaten. They expected cruelty. Nazi propaganda had warned them to prepare for starvation, shackles, and hard labor. Instead, they were handed steaming mugs of coffee, bread still warm from field ovens, and cigarettes offered by guards speaking hesitant German. The clatter of tin cups on mess tables mixed with soft English voices, a strange rhythm that made surrender feel less like ruin and more like awakening. Behind this civility was immense organization. Operation Torch and the North African Campaign had landed more than 850,000 Allied troops by 1943. With them came hospitals, surgical units, hospital ships, and mountains of medical supplies. While German medics struggled with shortages of ether, the Americans unpacked crates of anesthetics. Where German pharmacies scraped together the last sulfonamide tablets, the Allies distributed them by the box. For captured German doctors, the shock was professional as much as personal. They were led not to cages, but to holding centers where Red Cross officials moved freely. They were informed that, under the 1929 Geneva Convention, their medical commissions would be respected. They would not perform manual labor, would receive pay equal to American officers of their rank, and would continue practicing medicine, this time under the eyes of their former enemies. The sensory contrasts were overwhelming. Dust still clung to their boots from Tunisian roads, but at the port of Bizerte, where many boarded the transport ships, the air carried sea salt and machine oil. Instead of cattle cars, they boarded Liberty ships, merchant freighters built to haul 10,000 tons of cargo, now converted to carry 2,000 men across the Atlantic. One doctor, Feldman Carl B., later described the moment everything changed. "We stood on deck behind barbed wire, but the officers greeted us by rank. They asked what instruments we needed, what medicine was required. It wasn't humiliation, it was respect." That uneasy respect marked the beginning of transformation. Men who had practiced healing beneath a brutal regime were now facing a power that mixed strength with restraint. They were conquered, but not degraded. Yet they had no idea what awaited them on the other side of the ocean: vast camps, immense hospitals, and a medical system that would make them question everything they believed. The answer to why Americans treated them differently lay in a document most had once skimmed in: training, the 1929 Geneva Convention. Unlike the Reich, which twisted the rules, the United States enforced them strictly, especially for medical personnel. Captured doctors, dentists, and medics weren't ordinary prisoners. They were retained personnel, kept to treat their own wounded. They couldn't be forced into labor or neglected. They were to be given the same pay, rations, and conditions as U.S. medical officers of equal rank. In other words, even behind wire, German doctors remained doctors. The contrast to the Eastern Front was unbearable. Some of these men had seen Soviet medical officers executed or worked to death. Now in American hands, they found clean linens, sterilized instruments, and shelves stocked with antiseptics. It wasn't propaganda. It was policy. By late 1943, over 150,000 German prisoners were already in U.S. custody. By war's end, that number would rise to 425,000. Many were medical professionals. At Fort Sam Houston, Texas, entire German hospital units worked alongside American staff, not as slaves, but as colleagues. "We weren't equals in war," one American surgeon said, "but in medicine the scalpel erases borders." His German counterpart, Dr. Heinrich L., echoed, "They didn't strip our ranks. They addressed us as physicians, consulted us. The shock of respect was greater than the shock of defeat. This respect wasn't just moral, it was practical. Letting German doctors treat their own people reduced the burden on American medical units. Law became efficiency. For the Germans, the sensory experience told the truth. They held stereo silk sutures instead of reused catgut, smelled iodine instead of infection, and heard the quiet hum of dependable X-ray machines instead of the hiss of kerosene lamps. Even the balance of a well-made scalpel reminded them of what their homeland had lost. But that respect came with disquiet. If the enemy honored the laws of war so thoroughly, what did that say about the Reich's own cruelty? For many, these thoughts stayed unspoken, but they planted seeds that would grow long after captivity. The Atlantic voyage tested patience and faith. Boarding a Liberty ship meant stepping into the unknown. They feared U-boats more than guards, yet what unsettled them most was the civility around them. At Bizerte and Oran, they had braced for cages. Instead, they were ushered aboard by rank. Liberty ships, steel workhorses built at 3 per day, were fitted with bunks, mess halls, and infirmaries. Diesel and salt mixed with disinfectant as the ships moved west. The clang of trays echoed through the holds as German prisoners ate meat stew, beans and bread, meals they hadn't imagined in years. In Africa, field hospitals had survived on 1,200 calories a day. On American transports, the men received almost twice that. The doctors noticed every detail: clean bandages, humming generators, crates of sulfur drugs. One surgeon from Munich said later, "We sailed on a freighter of war, but it held better equipment than most hospitals in Germany." By the war's end, over 370,000 German prisoners would cross the Atlantic, doctors, dentists, pharmacists among them. Indoctrinated to see Americans as crude and backward, they instead witnessed discipline and precision everywhere. Even as depth charges boomed in the distance, American sailors moved calmly, methodically. The prisoners tasted canned fruit, felt the vibration of engines, heard the endless thrum that carried them to a strange new world, where defeat began to feel like revelation. When the ships reached America, past the Statue of Liberty, past the cranes of Norfolk and Boston, expectation met reality. The Germans expected mockery. Instead, American officers saluted them by title and assigned them to sprawling camps that looked more like towns than prisons. Across the country, from Texas to North Carolina, Kansas to Arizona, more than 500 POW compounds rose, orderly, efficient, humane. Camp Butner in North Carolina alone spread over 40,000 acres, with a hospital treating 14,000 patients and employing 2,200 American staff. At Fort Sam Houston, German doctors entered gleaming wards, sterilized operating rooms, and X-ray labs buzzing with power that never failed. "The hospital here," one physician said, "was larger than our university clinic in Heidelberg." By late 1944, the U.S. Army Medical Department managed over 130 POW hospitals nationwide, all stocked with supplies and even staffed partly by Germans. The logic was simple. Who better to care for German patients than their own doctors, guided by American oversight? Captured physicians were addressed by title, signed charts, and often wore Red Cross armbands. "We didn't humiliate them," wrote Captain William S., an American administrator. In surgery, the enemy became just another man with steady hands. For German doctors raised to think themselves heirs of Europe's best medicine, this was disorienting. "We were conquered not only by soldiers," one muttered, "but by hospitals. The sensory differences were everywhere: buzzing drills, shining instruments, antiseptic air. Burn victims received advanced grafts. Orthopedic wards had traction frames and wheelchairs. Psychiatric patients received therapy instead of punishment. The enemy not only healed them, but did so with compassion. Dr. Kurt H. recorded, Our men began speaking of the Americans with respect. Some even felt shame for believing the lies. The true revelation came inside the operating rooms, where collaboration erased enmity. German surgeons were invited to assist or demonstrate techniques from the Eastern Front. Americans taught them the use of penicillin. They were skilled, said Lieutenant Colonel James P. It would have been foolish not to learn from them. The hiss of oxygen tanks, the steady tick of sterilizers, the feel of latex gloves, all symbolized a world of medicine far beyond wartime Europe. By the end of 1945, over 1,000 German medical staff practiced daily across U.S. camps. Some attended American staff meetings, traded journals, and debated methods. Before a patient, one internist said, nationality disappears. Still, tension remained. Some clung to Nazi pride. Others embraced the freedom to simply practice medicine. Dr. Otto K. wrote, "We were prisoners, but through our work, we were free again." The deeper revelation came in ethics. German physicians saw that medicine in America was not ruled by ideology but by humanity. Nurses cared for Germans as gently as Americans. "At first I doubted I could treat them," one nurse wrote. "But in pain, there are no enemies." The faint rustle of sheets, the cool taste of ice chips, the touch of a nurse's hand, all spoke louder than propaganda. At Camp Butner, thousands of Germans lay beside Americans, receiving the same therapy and rehabilitation. This was not staged kindness, it was routine. Some German doctors even treated American patients. The battlefield vanished inside those walls, recalled Dr. Friedrich L. Psychiatry astonished them most. In Germany, breakdowns were treated as cowardice. In America, they were illnesses to heal. "It was the first time I saw mental pain treated as real," one psychiatrist admitted. The whir of typewriters recording patient notes, the hum of drills polishing dental work. These small details became lessons in compassion. While German cities burned, their captured soldiers received better medical care in enemy hospitals than many civilians did at home. Every operation, every ward visit chipped away at Nazi myths. "In those moments," one prisoner wrote, "we were not Germans and Americans, we were doctors, and before us lay the sick." By 1946, barbed wire lost its meaning. The war had ended, but its lessons endured. The German POW doctors who returned home did so changed. They had arrived expecting punishment and left with notebooks full of techniques, diagrams, and something more, an understanding of medicine grounded in humanity. By 1947, over 370,000 German prisoners had passed through U.S. custody, thousands of them medical workers. Camps like Butner, Forest, and Fort Robinson became classrooms in modern medicine. At least 2,000 German professionals practiced there, a silent exchange of knowledge unmatched in scale. Many later confessed a strange homesickness for America. "We saw a land where medicine wasn't rationed by ideology," wrote Dr. Heinrich B. "When I returned to Munich, I dreamed of hospitals with clean sheets, antibiotics, and food for every patient. It wasn't fantasy. We had lived it. They carried home more than skills. They carried a revelation that abundance could coexist with compassion, that power could serve mercy. The smell of antiseptic and coffee, the click of typewriters, the taste of food served without bias. These memories became symbols of a moral truth. The strength of a nation lies not in its weapons, but in its humanity." Back in Germany, these doctors quietly changed their field, introducing preventive care, psychiatry, and respect for patients. "I learned," one wrote, "that to treat the sick is to serve humanity, not ideology." For America, too, the lesson was clear. By treating enemy doctors as colleagues, they proved that democracy's power was moral as much as military. The story of German POW doctors was not one of defeat, but transformation. They came as conquerors and left as students, humbled by the discovery that the enemy's greatest weapon was compassion. The true victory of the war was not only military, it was human. "The strongest nation," one German doctor later said, "is the one that heals, not the one that conquers."